The slap came without warning, leaving a red handprint across Priya's cheek that burned like fire. Mrs. Mehta stood over her with that cold smile she always wore after these episodes. Her perfectly manicured nails still curved from the strike. "Perhaps next time you'll remember the correct formula," she said smoothly, returning to her chair as if she'd merely corrected a math problem rather than assaulted her student. Priya touched her burning face with shaking fingers, tasting blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. She was 17 and had been coming to Mrs. Mehta's apartment for math tutoring for 18 months, ever since her parents decided she needed help for her engineering entrance exams. What had started as strict teaching had slowly become something darker, something Priya couldn't name but felt was deeply wrong. Mrs. Mehta was considered the best tutor in their Delhi neighborhood, with a waiting list of desperate parents trying to secure her services. She taught at a prestigious school for 20 years before focusing on private tutoring, and her students consistently scored in the top percentiles. Parents spoke her name with reverence, calling her tough but brilliant, strict but effective. What those parents didn't see was how Mrs. Mehta's methods evolved once the door closed and the session began. The verbal abuse had started small, calling Priya stupid when she struggled with equations, lazy when she couldn't grasp concepts immediately. Then came physical punishments, ruler strikes across knuckles for errors, standing in corners for being late, kneeling on the floor while solving problems until her knees bled through her salwar. Priya had tried telling her mother once, but Mrs. Kapoor had waved her off impatiently. Mrs. Mehta is from the old school beta. Discipline builds character. She's expensive and she gets results. That's what matters. Her father had been worse, suggesting Priya needed to work harder if her teacher was frustrated, that she was too sensitive. So Priya learned to stay silent, to endure, to become smaller with each passing week. She started wearing long sleeves even in Delhi's brutal summer to hide bruises. She memorized everything perfectly before sessions, desperate to avoid Mrs. Mehta's wrath, but somehow there was always something wrong, always some reason for punishment. The teacher seemed to enjoy finding faults, watching Priya flinch. Wielding absolute power over someone too afraid to fight back, today had been particularly brutal because Priya had dared to question one of Mrs. Mehta's solutions, having seen a different method in her textbook. She'd mentioned it politely, thinking the teacher would appreciate her initiative. Instead, Mrs. Mehta's face had darkened with rage at being contradicted, and the slap had come before Priya could apologize or take it back. "You think you know better than me?" Mrs. Mehta asked, her voice dangerously soft as she settled into her chair. "You think reading one textbook makes you qualified to question someone with 30 years of experience?" She picked up her red correction pen, the one she used to slash through Priya's work like she was drawing blood. "Show me your homework, and try not to disappoint me further." Priya's hands trembled as she pulled out her notebook, pages filled with careful calculations revised multiple times to meet impossible standards. It wouldn't matter how perfect her work was. Mrs. Mehta would find something to criticize, some excuse to escalate. The apartment felt suffocating, heavy curtains blocking afternoon sun, air thick with incense and the teacher's expensive perfume. Mrs. Mehta began reviewing the homework, her red pen moving with harsh strokes. "Pathetic," she muttered, underlining an entire problem. "Did you even think before writing this garbage? When parents ask about your progress, what should I tell them? That you're an idiot who can't solve basic calculus?" She stood abruptly. "Stand up. Hold out your hands." Priya obeyed, legs weak beneath her. Knowing what came next, Mrs. Mehta retrieved her wooden ruler from the desk. The same ruler that had left purple welts across Priya's palms dozens of times. The first strike came hard, the crack echoing in the quiet room. Priya gasped but didn't cry out. knowing any sound earned additional strikes. By the fifth blow, tears streamed silently down her face, but she kept her hand steady, mouth shut, fighting every instinct to scream. "Have you learned your lesson?" Mrs. Mehta asked, breathing elevated from exertion. Priya nodded desperately. "Good. Sit down and redo these problems. You'll stay until they're perfect, even if that takes all night." The session lasted 4 hours, with Mrs. Mehta rejecting Priya's work twice and forcing her to start over each time. When the teacher finally deemed it acceptable, darkness had fallen outside and Priya had missed dinner. Her mother called during that time, and Mrs. Mehta answered sweetly, praising Priya's dedication, saying what a pleasure it was to teach such a hardworking student. When Priya finally left at 9 p.m., her body ached everywhere and her mind felt numb with exhaustion and despair. She walked to the bus stop, barely noticing evening crowds or street vendors calling out. At home, her parents would ask how tutoring went, and she would lie and say it was fine, because what choice did she have? That night, unable to sleep, Priya found herself scrolling through her phone, looking at classmates' social media posts. Everyone seemed so happy, so normal, posting about movies and silly arguments with friends. She opened her notes app and started typing not homework, but something else. A detailed account of everything Mrs. Mehta had done to her over 18 months. The words poured out in a rush, filling page after page. Verbal abuse, physical punishment, psychological manipulation. Writing it down made it real in a new way, transformed scattered traumatic memories into a coherent narrative of systematic abuse. When she finally stopped at 2 a.m., she'd written thousands of words of testimony that could be shown to someone. Used to make people understand, Priya almost deleted it, almost erased the evidence because it felt safer to stay silent. But something stopped her, some small spark of defiance that had survived Mrs. Mehta's efforts to crush it. Instead, she saved the document, backed it up, and closed her phone. She didn't know what she'd do with this testimony, but at least it existed now outside her traumatized mind. Over the next few weeks, Priya continued documenting everything while attending sessions. She bought a small voice recorder, hiding it in her bag to capture Mrs. Mehta's verbal abuse. She kept a detailed diary with dates, times, descriptions of each incident. She photographed bruises, welts, essays marked with vicious red ink, any evidence she could gather. But the abuse escalated. Mrs. Mehta seemed to sense some subtle resistance in Priya's bearing and responded by tightening control. Sessions grew longer, punishments more severe. Priya spent 5 or 6 hours at a time in that apartment, emerging exhausted and hurting, falling behind in other subjects because all her energy went into surviving the tutoring. Her parents praised Mrs. Mehta whenever they saw her, grateful their daughter had such a committed teacher. The teacher would smile and demur, saying it was her pleasure to help such a bright student. The disconnect between public persona and private reality would have been laughable if it weren't devastating. At school, Priya withdrew from friends and activities. She stopped going to art club, turned down invitations to movies and parties, isolated herself. It was easier to be alone than maintain the exhausting facade that everything was fine. Her best friend Nisha asked repeatedly what was wrong, but Priya couldn't find words to explain. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening in March. Priya arrived for her session to find Mrs. Mehta in the foulest mood yet. The teacher was angry about something unrelated to conflict with another parent perhaps, and took it out on Priya from the moment she walked through the door. The session was relentlessly brutal. 2.5 hours of constant criticism and physical punishment. At one point, when Priya couldn't immediately solve a trigonometry problem, Mrs. Mehta grabbed her by the hair and yanked her head back sharply. "Stupid, useless girl," she hissed, face inches from Priya's. "I waste my valuable time on you, and this is what I get." Maybe I should call your parents right now and tell them you're unteachable, that their money is going down the drain. Something inside Priya snapped. Maybe it was accumulated rage from 18 months of abuse, or knowledge that this was wrong and illegal, or simply that she'd reached her breaking point. Instead of apologizing or crying or dissociating, Priya met Mrs. Mehta's eyes and spoke clearly. "Let go of me. You have no right to touch me like this." The shock on Mrs. Mehta's face was instant. She released Priya's hair as if burned, stepping back, genuine surprise crossing her features before being replaced by cold fury. "What did you just say to me?" Her voice was dangerously quiet. "Did you just refuse me? Did you dare speak back?" "I said let go," Priya repeated, heart hammering but voice steady. "You're not allowed to hit students. It's against the law. This isn't teaching, it's abuse." The words felt powerful and terrifying. She could see Mrs. Mehta's face turning red with rage, but she couldn't stop. "I'm not coming back here. I'm done with you. You ungrateful little..." Mrs. Mehta moved toward her, hand raised, but Priya was already grabbing her bag and backing toward the door. "After everything I've done for you, I could ruin you, you know? One word from me to your school, to university admissions boards, and your future is over. No one will believe you over me." Priya reached the door, hand on the handle. "I have evidence," she said, surprising herself with her calm tone despite racing pulse. "Photos, recordings, documentation of everything you've done for 18 months. So if you try to ruin me, Mrs. Mehta, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of teacher you really are." She pulled the door open and ran, not waiting for a response, taking stairs two at a time. Bursting onto the street, she didn't stop running until several blocks away, finally collapsing onto a bench, gasping for air, shaking with adrenaline and terror and something that might have been triumph. She'd done it. She'd stood up to Mrs. Mehta, spoken truth aloud, reclaimed some fragment of power. But what came next? The teacher's threats weren't empty. She did have influence, connections, ability to damage Priya's academic future. That night, while her parents slept, Priya made her decision. She would take her evidence to someone in authority, not her parents who wouldn't believe her, but someone objective and official. She researched child protection organizations, legal aid services, considered filing a police report. Each option carried risks, but doing nothing suddenly felt more impossible than any of them. She drafted an email to the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, carefully laying out her case with dates, descriptions, attached evidence. She explained she was a minor systematically abused by a private tutor, that she had documentation to support claims, that she needed guidance on proceeding. She read it over a dozen times. Then finally, just after midnight, press send. The response came the next morning, a phone call from a caseworker named Mrs. Patel. "I received your email," she said, voice professional but kind. "What you've described is very serious. We take these allegations extremely seriously. Can we schedule a time for you to come to our office? I'll need to review your evidence and take a detailed statement." Priya agreed to meet Thursday after school, which gave her 2 days to prepare mentally for what was coming. She told her parents she had a school project, keeping her out late, another lie, but this one in service of truth. She spent those days organizing evidence into clear chronological presentation, writing out a timeline of abuse. Preparing to tell her story completely, Thursday arrived and Priya navigated to the commission office in a daze of anxiety and determination. Mrs. Patel greeted her warmly, ushering her into a private room with comfortable chairs and tissues on the table. "Take your time," the caseworker said. "This is a safe space. I believe you and I'm here to help. Start wherever feels right." So Priya told her story. She described how Mrs. Maya's behavior had escalated gradually from strictness to cruelty. She detailed specific incidents, supporting each with corresponding evidence, photos of bruises matched to diary dates, voice recordings of verbal abuse, essays marked with vicious comments. Mrs. Patel listened intently, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting Priya speak. The interview lasted 3 hours. By the end, Priya felt emotionally drained, but also strangely lighter, as if naming the abuse to someone who believed her had lifted some weight. Mrs. Patel reviewed all evidence carefully, expression increasingly grave. "This is extensive documentation," she said finally. "What you've experienced clearly constitutes abuse, both physical and psychological. We're launching a formal investigation into Mrs. Mehta's tutoring practices. What happens now?" Priya asked, voice small. Reality of what she'd set in motion was sinking in. "Will you talk to her? To my parents? What if no one believes me?" The questions tumbled out, all her fears suddenly concrete. Mrs. Patel's expression was compassionate. "We'll interview Mrs. Mehta, yes, and your parents will need to be informed since you're a minor. We'll also reach out to her other students to see if there are additional victims. I won't lie, this will be difficult. People may doubt you given Mrs. Mehta's reputation, but you've done something incredibly brave and your evidence is compelling. We'll do everything in our power to ensure justice." The investigation moved swiftly. Within a week, child protection officials interviewed Mrs. Mehta, who denied everything, claiming Priya was a troubled student making false accusations because of poor grades. But when officials contacted her other students, 3 more came forward with similar stories, years of abuse they'd been too afraid to report. The patterns were undeniable. Priya's parents were devastated when officials informed them. Her mother cried, unable to reconcile the kind teacher she'd known with the abuser her daughter described. Her father was angry at Mrs. Mehta, yes, but also at Priya for not telling them sooner, for letting this go on so long. "Why didn't you say something?" he demanded. "We would have stopped it immediately." "I tried to tell you," Priya said quietly, finding courage she hadn't known she possessed. "A year ago, I told Mom that Mrs. Mehta was too harsh, that I was scared of her. You both said I was being oversensitive, that discipline was good for me. So I stopped trying to tell you." The words hung in the air. An indictment neither parent could deny. The case gained media attention when charges were formally filed: assault, child abuse, criminal intimidation. Mrs. Mehta's perfect reputation crumbled overnight as more former students came forward. Some now adults who'd carried trauma for years. Parents who'd praised her were horrified, realizing they'd paid someone to abuse their children. The tutoring community in Delhi was shaken to its core. Mrs. Mehta hired expensive lawyers and fought the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. 4 victims with consistent stories, medical documentation, recordings, photographs of a pattern of abuse spanning over a decade. The trial was difficult, with Priya having to testify in detail about her experiences, facing Mrs. Mehta's cold stare across the courtroom. But Priya no longer felt like the scared girl who'd endured abuse in silence. She'd found her voice, her strength, her refusal to be a victim. When Mrs. Mehta's lawyer tried to discredit her, suggesting she was lying for attention, Priya calmly presented her evidence dates. Times, recordings, every detail meticulously documented. The jury believed her. The verdict came on a humid afternoon in July, guilty on all counts. Mrs. Mehta was sentenced to 3 years in prison and banned permanently from teaching or tutoring. She stood in the courtroom, the powerful woman who terrorized students for years, now facing consequences for her actions. As police led her away, she looked at Priya one last time, and Priya stared back, unflinching. In the months that followed, Priya slowly healed. She started therapy to process the trauma, rebuilt relationships with friends she'd pushed away, found her way back to art club and activities she'd abandoned. Her parents were more attentive, more willing to listen, carrying guilt for having failed to protect her when she'd tried to ask for help. Priya also became an advocate, speaking at schools about recognizing educational abuse, encouraging students to speak up if teachers or tutors crossed boundaries. She worked with child protection organizations to develop better reporting systems to help other victims find their voices. Her pain had purpose now, transformed into something that might prevent others from suffering as she had. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at sudden movements, still carried scars both visible and invisible. Healing wasn't linear or simple, but she was no longer defined by what had been done to her. She was defined by how she'd fought back, how she'd refused to stay silent, how she'd turned her victimization into victory. The other students Mrs. Mehta had abused reached out to Priya, thanking her for her courage in coming forward. One girl said, "I carried that shame for 5 years, thinking it was my fault, that I deserved it. You showed me it wasn't my fault. You gave me permission to be angry, to demand better. Thank you." Those words meant more than any verdict. On the 1-year anniversary of Mrs. Mehta's sentencing, Priya wrote an article for a major newspaper about her experience. She detailed the abuse, the difficulty of coming forward, the importance of believing children when they say something is wrong. The article went viral, sparking nationwide conversations about corporal punishment, educational abuse, and student safety. Priya received thousands of messages from people sharing their own stories of abusive teachers, thanking her for speaking truth to power. Some were current students who used her example to find courage to report their own situations. Others were adults still carrying decades-old trauma, finding validation in her words. The impact rippled outward in ways she'd never imagined. Her parents read the article with tears in their eyes, finally fully understanding what their daughter had endured. "I'm so sorry," her mother said, voice breaking. "I should have listened. I should have protected you. Can you forgive me?" Priya hugged her mother tightly. "I forgive you," she said. "But we need to do better. All of us. We need to listen to children, believe them, prioritize their safety over reputation or convenience." Mrs. Mehta served her sentence in prison, reportedly spending her time maintaining her innocence, claiming the students had conspired against her. But the evidence spoke louder than her denials. Upon release, she was a pariah, unable to work in education, her reputation destroyed. She'd lost everything: her career, her standing, her power to the same system of justice she'd assumed would protect her over her victims. Priya didn't take satisfaction in Mrs. Mehta's fall, exactly. It wasn't about revenge in the sense of wanting the teacher to suffer for suffering's sake. It was about justice, accountability, ensuring this woman could never hurt another student. It was about breaking the cycle of abuse that had been allowed to continue unchecked for too long. Years later, Priya became a teacher herself, the kind of teacher she'd needed. The kind who created safe spaces, who listened to students, who understood that education should empower rather than traumatize. She kept Mrs. Mehta's photo on her desk as a reminder of what she would never become, of the responsibility she carried every time a student entered her classroom. One of her students, a quiet girl who reminded Priya of her younger self, stayed after class one day. "Ms. Priya," she said hesitantly, "my math tutor. She hits me when I get problems wrong. Is that normal?" Priya's heart clenched with familiar pain and fierce protective anger. She knelt down to the girl's level, looked her in the eyes, and said firmly, "No, that is not normal. That is abuse. And we're going to stop it right now." She helped that student report the tutor, walked her through the process Priya herself had navigated years before. The investigation revealed another pattern of abuse, another predator removed from positions of power over children. And Priya knew this was her purpose, to be the adult she'd needed, to fight for students who couldn't yet fight for themselves, to ensure her suffering created change. The revenge Priya had taken wasn't brutal in the physical sense. It was something more powerful and more complete. She'd exposed the truth, demanded accountability, transformed her victimization into advocacy that protected countless others. She'd taken back her power, not through violence, but through courage, not through cruelty, but through justice. And that was the most devastating revenge of all, ensuring that Mrs. Mehta's legacy would be defined not by the students she'd traumatized, but by the one student who'd refused to stay silent, who'd fought back, and who'd won.